Hello friends, welcome to this special program on the US general election. Last night was a sleepless night for many. The 2020 US presidential election was thrilling, and the two parties eventually faced off in Midwest swing states. After the data showed that President Trump took the lead in several key swing states, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin stopped counting ballots for a few hours. Overnight, the situation flipped. Former Vice President Biden took the lead in Michigan and Wisconsin. The media subsequently announced that Biden had won the two states. The Trump campaign has filed lawsuits demanding Michigan and Pennsylvania to stop counting votes and requesting a recount in Wisconsin. So how will the election situation develop? Tonight, we had invited 4 guests to analyze the latest U.S. presidential election situation for us. 2 of our guests are on site. One is the political commentator, Mr. Chen Pokong. Hi, Mr. Chen.
Hello, everyone.
Current affairs commentator, Mr. Tang Jinyuan, is also with us.
Hello, Jenny. Hello, everyone.
Thank you. We also have 2 online guests, host of NTD TV's weekly economic review, Fang. Hello.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Jenny.
Okay, thank you. Gary Young is also online. Gary is the chairman of the Michigan Chinese Conservatives Alliance. Hi, Gary.
Hello, Jenny. Hello, everyone.
Thank you. I would like to invite Gary to speak first, because as the chairman of Michigan Chinese Conservatives Alliance, Gary worked as a poll watcher at the TCP Center in Michigan last night. He also has a very detailed understanding of the developments in the key center today. So, I would like to ask Gary to speak first. Before that, Gary, can you please tell us a bit about the Michigan Chinese Conservatives Alliance?
Many mainland Chinese helped give a lot of support to President Trump during the 2016 general election. But our efforts were a bit amateur at the time. We did things such as flying banners and high-weight billboards to support Mr. Trump. Mainland Chinese had been quite indifferent in politics for many years, but they were very enthusiastic in supporting Trump in 2016. In terms of fundraising, I had never seen Chinese being so generous. We then wanted to take the opportunity to set up a grassroots organization, hoping that the Chinese in the United States can get more involved in local politics. Because politics is actually in the lives of each one of us, in our daily lives. We then registered a political organization in Michigan and with the Federal Election Commission. The purpose was to support the various Republican Party campaign activities that are aligned with our views. We participate in various election campaigns, including the midterm elections.
I heard that you also received indirect praise from President Trump, right?
Based on the 2016 experience, we set up some billboards on major highways in Michigan. We raised a lot of funds and were able to get these billboards. The message is, Chinese Americans are supporting Trump. We have fled socialism. We relate our support to our personal experiences.
That you escaped from socialism.
Yes, we meant that we have fled socialism. After we put up the billboards, many mainstream people mentioned them on their social media. There's a very famous radio station, WJR, in Michigan, and one of the hosts is Frank Beckman. On the morning of the general election, he did a telephone interview with President Trump. Trump said that the United States can't be a socialist nation. Then the host, Frank, mentioned that he saw a campaign billboard around 11 Mile Road on Highway 75. It reads, Chinese Americans is supporting Trump. We have fled socialism. When Trump heard it, I think he didn't quite get it right away. So he just casually said, I like it, I like it. But he then immediately said, I understand it's not easy for the Chinese Americans because of the current tensions between the U.S. and China. They can do this. I'm very, very thankful. He said, I love it. So President Trump heard of the billboards we've got for him.
Gary, let's talk about what everyone cares about most now, these swing states. One of them is Michigan. We know that President Trump was leading the poll on election night. Then the vote counting slowed down. The next morning, the situation reversed. You happened to be at one of the key vote counting centers, where you were volunteering as a poll watcher. You said that you have observed some irregularities. Tell us about it.
Okay, let me provide some context first. Detroit, the largest city in Michigan, is actually the place with the highest concentration of votes. All the absentee ballots in Detroit are counted in one place called the TCP Center, which is a convention and exhibition center. You may be more familiar with its former name, Cobo Center. It hosts a North American Auto Show every year. We received a request from the Republican Party. They needed a lot of volunteers to be poll challengers. We immediately organized a total of 50 Republican poll challengers, including 14 Chinese Americans. There are a total of 137 precincts in Michigan. I may not be correct about the last digit. One table was dedicated to each precinct to count the mail-in absentee ballots. This process is very important, so we went. The night shift from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. was the hardest to fill, so on the election night, more than a dozen of us covered this shift. Our main job was to monitor the vote counting at each table for potential violations. We also checked, for example, if there were any problems with the ballot printing. So we mainly did this during our night shift, and we left at 5 a.m.
What unusual phenomenon did you observe?
Let me talk about the process first. I have a piece of paper here. You can zoom the camera over. That's it. This is a diagram. 5 people sitting at 4 tables. These 5 people were hired by the Detroit city government or the state government. A total of 5 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seats. You may not be able to see clearly. Each of the 5 people had an electronic poll book. I watched this process. What's unique about Detroit is this. Normally, these workers should be from both parties. But as you know, in Detroit, the overwhelming majority are the Democrats. So very few Republicans work there. Therefore, we went to observe to prevent cheating. We at least serve as a deterrence. Then I took a look at the whole thing. My table was very, very slow. My table worked on precinct number 35. From the beginning, around 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., they processed about 150 to 160 ballots.
150 or 60 tables per table?
Yes, I discussed with my friends later. Some other tables processed even fewer than that number.
Please share with us the key issues here.
Towards the end of yesterday, I heard in the announcement that the shift we monitored processed 50,000 ballots. When I heard it, I thought that with 130 tables at the speed of 150 ballots at my table, that's about 20,000 ballots. It wouldn't be possible to reach the level of 50,000 ballots. Was my table particularly slow? Based on my observation, that was not the case. A friend was watching the ballot tabulator. He counted about a total of 7,000 ballots during our shift. When we were told later that we could use our mobile phones, I used my phone to check the vote counts. I remember it was after midnight. For Wayne County, which Detroit is in, Biden led by about 60,000 to 70,000 votes in Wayne County. Trump was ahead in the state of Michigan by about 300,000 votes. At about 4 a.m., a truck came in. A friend of ours, a Chinese-American volunteer, took down the license plate of the truck. He also went to the back of the truck. We were told that the truck delivered 38,000 ballots, and it was the last batch from the city clerk office. After we arrived at our shift, a large number of Democratic Party poll challengers came. The one I encountered was relatively friendly, but other friends of mine encountered very aggressive ones. They accused us, saying you guys from the suburbs look down upon us in the city, and some verbal conflicts occurred. At the time, we had not thought the situation was so complicated. Later, our shift time was up. It was about 6 a.m. after I got home. Before I went to bed, I checked the election results, and I was shocked. Trump's lead in Michigan reduced from 300,000 to several tens of thousands. Wayne County ballot counts gave Biden a lead of over 200,000.
In Wayne County, Biden's lead jumped from 70,000 to over 200,000 overnight.
Jenny, you just asked if Michigan stopped the counting of votes. It didn't stop during my shift, but it was very, very slow. My friend estimated a total of 7,000 ballots for my shift, and on November 4th, Republican poll challengers were not able to get in. I mobilized about a dozen of Chinese Americans who volunteered as poll challengers to cover November 4th, but none of them could enter the vote counting hall.
And I watched online videos and saw whiteboards were used to cover the glass.
Yes, all kinds of things were used to block the view, including pizza boxes and other things. This made people feel like they wanted to hide something. Basically, Republican poll challengers couldn't enter at all. Later, we tried to call ourselves independent, but even independents couldn't enter either. Even some reporters couldn't get in.
Access of poll challengers from both parties is guaranteed by laws in Michigan. If they didn't allow you to enter, what reasons did they give you?
Very simple. COVID capacity. But in fact, there were not that many people inside. More people were inside during my shift on the election night. COVID capacity was complete an excuse to block our watch, blockage to the vote counting hall, and blockage outside the TCP Center. The volunteers who arrived later couldn't even enter the building.
Thank you, Gary. We will come back to you for more details. I would like to invite our other guests to comment. Dongfang, what do you think?
Gary has mentioned a sudden jump in Biden's ballot counts overnight in Michigan. Similar things happened in Wisconsin as well, a jump of more than 100,000 votes while everyone is asleep. It happened in Wisconsin.
In both states?
Yes. Originally, the ballot count curves are parallel with Trump on the top, the red one on the top, and Biden's blue line underneath it. But at about 6 o'clock, look at the picture, and the blue curve rose in a straight line. This is very strange. What we just heard from Mr. Gary Young is very shocking. The count was slow. By Republican poll watchers' estimate, it was no more than 7,000 count, but the announcement said 50,000. If this is the case, it is highly possible there was a fraud. Look at the screenshot of the count curve. The 150,000 votes was added in such a short time, and the possibility of fraud involved it is very high. So now Trump team asks to stop the count in Michigan and Pennsylvania. He wants to send the Republican poll watchers to watch when the counting resumes, but I'm still worried.
But stopping the vote counts isn't going to solve the problem.
True. What about the ballots that have already been counted? Is recount the next step? The recount is ordered in Wisconsin because the two candidates' count gap is less than 1%. The candidate with the lower count has the legal right to request a recount without a lawsuit. Therefore, Wisconsin is going to recount. During the recount, only the ballot with no dispute from poll watchers from both parties will get counted. If any potential fraud is discovered during the recount or irregularities are discovered, then a lawsuit may ensue. The lawsuit may go through all the way to the Supreme Court. The Trump team hopes to file lawsuits nationwide, but I'm still very worried. For example, Pennsylvania and Michigan stopped counting votes, but what about the ballots that have already been counted? If the difference is larger than 1% and a legal challenge cannot be brought forward, what's next? So we are facing a constitutional crisis. If the Democratic Party blocked the glass doors and windows to keep poll watchers far away, Gary just said Republican poll watchers were denied access. Or if they were allowed to watch but couldn't watch it at the table and they had to stay 20 feet yards away, they wouldn't be able to see anything. Some took binoculars with them, and even the use of a binocular was not allowed. So, the situation was indeed very irritating for Republicans and conservatives. It was shocking. Some of them protested at the door demanding a recount, saying that every vote should be counted. Biden also said the same thing in his speech this afternoon. He said that every vote must be counted. There is no dispute about that. The question is, how do you count? One vote, one person, or one legal vote, one person?
We cannot tell whether a ballot is real or fake because a ballot is anonymous. How can we tell?
In the complaint the Republican Party filed today, for example, the Trump legal team said that if the check boxes on a ballot were not filled out completely, the person who counts the vote in some places would fill it out for you so the ballot can be tallied. Some ballots were found to be misplaced into wrong precinct, so the officers can transfer the ballot to another precinct. And that is not the voter's own decision, but an election officer who decides for him. These are all illegal. If these things happen, we are in trouble. How can this be corrected? Therefore, the current constitutional crisis is very troublesome. It has become fait accompli.
Okay, Mr. Chen Pokong, what do you think of the possibility of a fraud? Do you think an election fraud is possible in the U.S. general election?
I noticed that the two presidential candidates had made public speeches. Biden spoke after midnight. Biden's message was very simple. He said that the election is not over yet. We have to count all the votes, and that he thinks he is winning. He was actually behind in swing states at times of speech. Circumstance, especially in swing states, indeed changed after he spoke. His speech was almost a kind of a secret signal. Sudden change occurred in swing states, especially those controlled by the Democratic Party. For example, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Changes occur in the states controlled by the Democrat, but not other states. This is suspicious. At the beginning of the general election, mail-in ballots were quite controversial. Then the Democratic and the Biden camps have always advocated it, but Trump and the Republicans have always opposed it. It seems now that mail-in ballot indeed harbor the key problems. In this regard, I had a bad feeling from the beginning. What's more, we know the origin of this voting by mail. The whole background of voting by mail is because of the plague. What about the pandemic? It came from China, and the Chinese Communist Party's shadow is in the background. Let's take a look at Biden's family. Why some states changed after his speech? The scandals of his family show that they don't have credibility. We can see that from his son. He showed up with his wife and grandchildren on election day. His son and daughter were no-show. Why? They are negative equity and would cost him votes. Therefore, they couldn't show up. Their no-show shows Biden knew. Both his son and daughter have scandals. From the information online, we can see that drug abuse is on the lighter side. On the heavier side, it is the collusion of foreign force. Since the Biden family is like this, then he is very likely to have a credibility problem in this election. If there is a fraud in the election, I would say it is completely possible. We also see Trump's difficulty and their extent. Almost all major forces are opposed to him. In addition to confronting Democratic Party Biden, the so-called mainstream media and the left media oppose him, and the social media are all against him, such as Facebook and Twitter. In other words, many are against Trump internationally. They cannot tolerate someone who is unconventional and would like to change the world and change the course of the United States. Then there is Communist China as a major factor in the background. Biden's scandal broke out on October 14th, and the mail-in votes started before that. Before Biden's scandal broke out, over 40 million early votes had been cast. It was a significant number. Let's look at Hillary. Similar to Biden, Hillary was also helped by the left and mainstream media in 2016. She also had scandals, such as emails. The scandal occurred before voting began. Therefore, the expose of scandals were indeed effective against Hillary. This time, the Biden's family scandal are 10 or 100 times worse than Hillary's, but they have not been hit as hard. He was escorted by the left and the mainstream media, and so many early votes cast before the news broke out also reduced his exposure.
Yes, Mr. Dongfang made a comment just now that we are facing a constitutional crisis. Do you think that if there really is fraud in the U.S. general election, is it a very serious challenge to the democratic system of the United States?
Yes, the United States have been operating under democracy for more than 200 years. It is relatively mature and trustworthy. However, with the election being a close game, several thousand or tens of thousands of fraud ballots may completely change the results. It was very weird that these three swing states under Democrat control flipped. It is very strange that we cannot say this is a nationwide problem, but local problems are still constitution issues. For example, Pennsylvania completely rejects the issue raised by the Republican Party. The state is controlled by the Democrat Party. Under such circumstance, it is necessary to go to the Supreme Court, because the United States has separation of powers.
Mr. Tang Jinyuan, what do you think of this fraud issue? I saw someone broke the news today, saying some in Texas have a batch of fake driver's license from the Chinese Communist Party. Texans can vote by drive-through, so these people use the fake driver's license and vote by drive-through. There's also instant voter registration, so these people can register for vote and cast a vote on the same day with their fake driver's license. What do you think?
I'd like to briefly add to the suspicious things mentioned by previous speakers. The vote counting in Michigan suddenly almost stopped, and after the drastic slowdown, there was a strange rebound in the vote counts for Biden. This phenomenon is not only in the presidential election. John James, a Republican senator candidate, experienced almost the same phenomenon as President Trump. He was in the lead when suddenly his vote counting was stopped. The situation flipped overnight. Gary also mentioned that Republican poll watchers were blocked. Michigan was not alone in this. The same has happened at least in Pennsylvania. Rudy Giuliani hosted a press conference in Pennsylvania today. He invited a poll watcher to talk about the personal experience. According to the witness, he was allowed entrance but had to keep at least 60 feet away. He couldn't see anything clearly, not even the postmark. It was impossible to see whether the ballots had postmarks at all. In this case, and he said, in just a short time, he was able to estimate that the number of votes that went through this way was hundreds of thousands of votes, at the level of 120,000 to 130,000. It is a huge number, so they thought the problem is very serious. In this case, one simply can't know whether these votes are legal. Other guests just mentioned the way to make fraudulent votes. As mentioned earlier, fake driver's licenses might be used. In fact, the U.S. Department of Justice announced about them 2 or 3 months ago. multiple cases in multiple states, including California. One case involved more than 200,000 fake driver's licenses. Yes, the authenticity of registered voters is potentially a big loophole. Registered voters, I know that many voters have actually passed away, or they have moved, left that state, or some people have actually become homeless. Their local registrations are likely to be exploited. The total number of such potentially problematic voter registrations is estimated at about 2 million. President Trump tweeted that a large number of votes in Michigan had been voided. Why are these ballots invalid? I see one reason right away. I heard someone said that because of the pen she used, which might have been provided, I don't know whether they provided an invalid pen intentionally or accidentally. When someone fills it out with an unqualified pen, then he would treat it as an invalid ballot and throws it away. There are many ways to cheat. Some may be more hidden.
Let me turn to Gary. As you mentioned earlier, the number of votes in Wayne County has suddenly increased. How could it happen?
For a fraud at this magnitude, there are several possibilities. One possibility is the ballot harvesting, which means that they organize this. Because many voters do not vote, the turnout is always very important. In order to achieve artificial turnout, there are various ways. I know there are people for hire in Detroit for ballot harvesting. To do this specifically, to find someone to either get the voters out or collect the ballots from them, there's a whole system for that, especially in places under the control of the Democratic Party. The lack of some supervision steps brings a possibility of a fraud.
What are the other possibilities?
I ran into Patrick Kobach yesterday at this TCP Center. He is a Republican and once ran for the governor of Michigan. He was worried that some tabulators and all these computers systems to record the ballots are connected to the internet. Why do most of the votes in the United States still rely on paper instead of electronic devices or mobile phones? It's because once electronic means are used, the vulnerability to frauds increase. I am an IT professional. I know such tricks are not difficult. This is also a concern. But I think that unless we inspect all the tabulators, poll books, and all the calculators, we won't be able to find problems. But I don't know if the current lawsuit can get to that point, or whether the electronic devices can be fully checked.
Thank you, Gary. I have a question about recount. How do you know if a ballot is legal or illegal?
First of all, the ballots are definitely anonymous. Once a ballot is recorded, the stub is separated from the ballot. There's no way to tell who has voted for whom. It should be that way. The only way is to check whether the total number of stubs can match the total number of votes, whether the records reconcile for a precinct, and then reconcile with the electronic records. There may be some traces of alteration on some ballots.
Fang, Mr. Chen just mentioned that the lawsuit might land in the Supreme Court. President Trump also mentioned the Supreme Court in his speech. What do you think will happen after the case goes to the Supreme Court? Will the Supreme Court decide a recount, for example, in Michigan?
I'm not a lawyer, but I see similarities between this year and 2000, Bush versus Gore. The dispute in Florida went to the Supreme Court and reached a final decision there. The Supreme Court decided the case for Bush, and the recount in Florida also went with Bush, and Al Gore conceded. If one side does not concede, then the situation may be stalled. That's why I mentioned a constitutional crisis. If the difference is within 1%, recount can be requested without a lawsuit. It's candidate's legal right to do so. The challenge is about the result of the recount. It may be he said, she said situation. Then a lawsuit is a natural next step. The Supreme Court justices can then make a decision. It's hard to predict how the future will unfold. It's interesting, though, that the Democratic Party seems to be taking the high road. They said, Trump, go ahead. Even though you have more conservatives in the Supreme Court, you will not win. You will lose miserably. That's the Democrats' attitude. Trump, of course, will go his own way. Trump will not give up. Based on what we know about Trump, he will fight. He will fight to the end. There was a very interesting phenomenon last night. Many people invested in the market and bet in casinos. The bets slowly moved in favor of Trump, and the dollar grew weaker, which is a sign for Trump. I thought both Trump himself and the market, including the gamblers, are all optimistic about Trump being re-elected. Then everything changed in the morning. This is not just a constitutional crisis, but a crisis of the credibility of our political system. If American people no longer trust the constitutions, and if this untrust grew deeper and bigger, this is very troublesome. It will be difficult to regain Americans' trust towards government. Left-wing media, mainstream left-wing media, and the large high-tech companies. The American people this time have seen very clearly the true color of the elites, see the true color of the establishment. Just like what Gary said, all gloves are off. In the past, they maintained some level of civility, not this time. It's life and death for both sides, and both sides see each other as enemy. I think Trump will definitely not give up and will fight to the end. It's in Trump's blood.
Mr. Chen, what do you think? How long will the legal battles last between now and January 20th next year? How is the American society going to be?
This legal dispute or constitutional crisis may be worse than that in 2000. Because that time the dispute was only in Florida, and the recount involved several thousands of ballots. Bush eventually won with several hundred votes. The situation in 2000 was relatively simple. This time it is not simple at all. Because I said that Trump was actually prepared from the very beginning. From the beginning, during the entire election process, he realized that, we use a Chinese phrase, hostile force at home and abroad are encircling him. So he has already felt the crisis. In addition to the Communist China playing tricks, like the fake driver's license Ms. Tang just spoke about, the Democrats are also changing the rules in some states. There may be double counting of votes. Some European countries are not friendly to Trump. The force against Trump include mainstream media, social media, Wall Street tycoons, Hollywood superstars, and major multinational companies. New York's Bloomberg made several huge donations to help Biden. Biden's funds are twice as much as Trump's funds. Under such circumstances, Trump would be prepared to fight all the way. He first warned his opponent not to cheat. If Biden did not cheat, he said he would admit the result. Otherwise, he would not. He was also prepared for legal actions. Why was Judge Barrett confirmed so urgently? Trump knew that this time the coming are menacing. The whole old force at home and abroad, the old force in the United States.
Mr. Tang, what do you think of the legal developments?
I think this legal battle will take a long time. The legal dispute between Bush and Gore in 2000 lasted 36 days. It only involved Florida, and a part of Florida, if I remember correctly. This time we saw that at least the Trump administration proposed 2 states, right? It is Michigan and Wisconsin.
Also Nevada.
Yes. And when I recall some words by Rudy Giuliani at today's press conference, what he meant was, if fraud has occurred, it is very serious. They do not rule out the possibility of a nationwide lawsuit in the future. It may affect all precincts nationwide. Any problematic votes may be the basis of a lawsuit. The whole thing may take a long time.
I remember that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi once said that Biden would become the next president on the inauguration day, regardless of the vote counts. Is that right?
Yes. Hillary Clinton also told Biden not to concede on election day, no matter what. Looking back, there are some other meanings. Anyways, I think Trump is prepared for all of these. I saw his tweet on June 22nd. He said, "Rigged 2020 election. Millions of mail-in ballots will be printed by foreign countries and others. It will be the scandal of our times." Yes, it was from President Trump.
Ballots printed in foreign countries are illegal ballots.
Correct.
Those must be illegal ballots.
There are rumors on Twitter that only the Department of Homeland Security can print votes, to be confirmed.
In other words, it is not clear whether there are some unknown anti-counterfeiting technologies in the ballots, but at least President Trump's tweet was sent out on June 22nd, and his entire tweet was in all capital letters.
Gary, speaking of the U.S. constitutional crisis, if by January 20th, for example, the Biden camp announces that they have already got over 270 electoral votes, they should be sworn in as president, but the Trump camp does not recognize such a result. They say that our legal dispute is still in progress, and your result is illegal. What kind of situation will emerge then? Will the House step in?
This is completely uncharted territory and has never happened before, and it is also the worst scenario. The other guests have spoken about a constitutional crisis, and I totally agree. It has never happened before in American history. So what are the consequences? We really don't know at this point. The depths and the breadth of the constitutional crisis this time is scary. We don't know how deep the water is, and to what extent this can stir up the United States. I shudder when I think about it.
Why are people so torn by this election? What kind of things are at clash here? You mentioned the U.S. at crossroads. Can you elaborate?
This crossroad is whether the United States can keep its own greatness and its unique value system, which makes the United States great, or the country will slide down to an ending in Venezuelan style. Some may think that I'm exaggerating, but it's too easy for a democratic system to go downhill. I feel the crisis strongly. The crisis was there in 2016, but it's even stronger in 2020. All political forces have gone out and stopped pretending to be nice. We can see this from the censorship by Twitter and Facebook on the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's hard drive.
Dongfang, what do you think of the crossroads? What are the key issues here?
Left-wing media, mainstream left-wing media, and the large high-tech companies. The American people this time have seen very clearly the true color of the elites, see the true color of the establishment. Just like what Gary said, all gloves are off. In the past, they maintained some level of civility, not this time. It's life and death for both sides, and both sides see each other as enemy. I think Trump will definitely not give up and will fight to the end. It's in Trump's blood.
Yes, Mr. Chen. The result of the U.S. election has a considerable impact on the world. Let's not mention the world, just talk about the CCP. Some Chinese netizens say that the CCP surrenders as soon as it's choked, but resurrects once we let go of the hands at its throat. If Trump's trade war and China policy has indeed choked the CCP's throat, then if Biden comes to power, do you think that the Communist Party will survive as soon as you let go?
The Chinese Communist Party convened the 5th plenary session at the end of October, before the U.S. election. There are no conclusions and no major changes. The fundamental reason is that the CCP's top leaders were actually waiting nervously for the result of U.S. election. If Biden comes to power, the CCP can be demanding at him because it has a grasp of the Biden family, and Biden himself vowed to reciprocate his attitude at the last moment of election. Communist China is no longer the biggest enemy. The biggest enemy is actually the enemy of last century, Russia, an outdated point of view. Russia is now a semi-democratic country with votes. Trump vs. China, facing America's greatest threat, was released in late October. All high-ranking officials clearly understand that Communist China is the greatest threat to the United States. In other words, when Trump is re-elected, he will definitely stand up to the CCP. If Trump is re-elected, CCP will soften, and it will soften in stages. It will at least stop war threat, military aggressions, and stop adventurous advance in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. But this is not necessarily the case once Biden is elected. Speaking of the CCP media, I noticed that since some time ago, the official CCP media and the left media of the United States were almost the same. On the one hand, they are very optimistic that Biden will win by a landslide, 8%, 10%, 15% nationwide, and taking most swing states. Moreover, the CCP media is looking forward to change in US-China relations, such as abolishing tariff, bilateral dialogues, and returning to one China policy of Biden's rise to power. This time, the leftist media hasn't reflected on themselves. I think it is not just an issue of shame or error, or a problem of losing credit. The leftist media did it intentionally. Fake polls were used to mislead the public, trying to give voters a feeling Trump is going to be defeated, and Biden will definitely win.
Socialism and communism in the United States have indeed eroded a large part of the society. Many people do not reject socialism, especially young people.
That's because they have not experienced socialism. Look at the Cubans and the Venezuelans who support Trump in Florida. Those who have experienced pain and know what Communist Party is, what socialism is.
Okay, we would like to thank all our guests for their insights. Our time is up. We will keep following the tense situation of the US election, and you are welcome to continue to follow our program. That's it for today. Goodbye.